There comes a time in each of our lives when we look into the mirror, not the one that reflects our face, but the one that reflects our soul. In that moment of quiet honesty, we may ask, who am I really? And what force moves me from within? We are taught to look outward, to seek truth in books, in leaders, in laws. But what if the ultimate truth was already seated deep within your own being? What if the divine spark, the creative, eternal, powerful essence of life, was not somewhere in the heavens but quietly dwelling inside you? To act as if God is within you is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is not about declaring yourself above others. It is about stepping into sacred responsibility. When you act as though the divine is within, you begin to live with integrity, courage, compassion, and purpose. Let us now explore 5 profound truths that emerge when you begin to walk this sacred path. When you begin to act as if God is within you, something subtle but profound starts to happen. The ordinary transforms. The smallest action becomes charged with invisible significance. The world is no longer a place of random events and meaningless repetitions. Instead, it becomes a living symbol, a mirror of your inner reality. You do not merely exist, you participate in something sacred. You are no longer a passive observer of life's unfolding. You become the one who holds and honors its meaning. The ancient soul knew this truth well. To them, lighting a fire was not just for warmth, it was communion with the divine flame. Washing the body was not just cleanliness, it was purification of the soul. Their rituals were bridges between the seen and unseen. They did not ask whether the gods were real, in the way a scientist might. They lived as if the divine breathed through every rock, tree, word, and gesture. In that posture, life was sacred theatre, full of suffering, yes, but also full of awe. This sacred posture is not a return to superstition. It is an awakening to the deeper layers of consciousness. When you act as though the divine is within you, your behavior changes, not from fear or conditioning, but from reverence. Your words gain weight. Your decisions become echoes of something older and wiser than your ego. You become a bearer of meaning, not just a collector of facts or follower of trends. Imagine speaking to someone who is grieving. Most people will offer cliches or, worse, avoid the encounter altogether. But when you act from the place that knows your presence is holy, you sit with them in silence. You listen, not with the ears alone, but with your whole being. And when you speak, you do so not to fix them, but to be with them. That is a sacred act. That is prayer without words. Think of how this manifests in forgiveness. True forgiveness is not about forgetting, nor does it require the other to apologize. It is the soul's decision to release the burden of vengeance. When you forgive, not because the other deserves it, but because something within you calls for peace, you step out of the cycle of reactivity. You act not as the wounded, but as the healer. That act of mercy is not weakness, it is divine strength. It is a human soul revealing its likeness to something eternal. We see glimpses of this sacred living in stories that transcend time. Consider the life of Viktor Frankl, a man who was imprisoned in a concentration camp during one of history's darkest hours. Amidst hunger, cruelty, and death, he refused to surrender his inner dignity. He would offer his last piece of bread to another prisoner. He would comfort the hopeless. He endured not by pretending it wasn't hell, but by choosing to find meaning even in the ashes. He wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." That why was not given to him by the world. It rose from within. He acted, not as a broken man, but as a vessel of something sacred. This is the transformation that occurs when you act as if the divine dwells in you. You begin to walk differently. You listen more carefully. You speak less often, but when you do, your words carry weight. You do not seek attention because you no longer need external validation. Your gaze becomes calm and present. Even your silence begins to speak. It is not an easy path. The world will still rage, injustice will still exist. But when you live as the keeper of sacred meaning, you become part of the antidote. You bring coherence to chaos, dignity to suffering, and grace to conflict. You no longer pass through life like a ghost. You walk it like a priest walks the altar. This sacred view of life does not make you naive. It makes you aware. Aware that behind the surface of things, a deeper drama is always unfolding, the drama of the soul waking up. When you honor that, you become not just a person living through time, you become a living symbol of something that time cannot destroy. And the most remarkable thing is this: you don't need anyone's permission. You only need to begin. Act as if every moment matters. Act as if your breath is sacred. Act as if love is not something you search for, but something you give freely, because it overflows from the place within you where the divine still lives. When you act as if God is within you, something begins to shift in how you approach right and wrong. The moral dimension of your life becomes more than rules or social conditioning. It becomes a matter of inner truth, of sacred responsibility. Morality is no longer a set of commandments imposed by an external authority, nor a list of behaviors designed to earn praise or avoid punishment. It arises from within, from the soul's own knowing. That knowing does not speak in shouts or arguments. It speaks in stillness, in quiet resistance, in that unmistakable feeling that something is either deeply aligned or painfully off. And this is where real courage begins, because the moment you choose to follow that inner voice, you often find yourself walking a path that is invisible to others. You may be praised one day and condemned the next, but your compass no longer spins in reaction to applause or disapproval. It locks on something deeper, your own unshakable sense of what is true. This kind of morality cannot be borrowed, memorized, or outsourced. It must be lived, felt, tested. It comes from an ongoing inner dialogue, a willingness to ask yourself not, "What will they think?" but "What is right?" Imagine a young woman in a corporate office. She's competent, respected, rising through the ranks. One afternoon she discovers a financial discrepancy, a subtle misrepresentation on a report, small enough to ignore. Her manager, when confronted, brushes it off. "Just let it go," he says. "No one will know." Others have seen it too, but they turn their eyes. The pressure to conform is strong. The reward for silence is security, but something inside her resists. Not because she wants to make noise, not because she seeks glory, but because silence in this moment would cost her soul its integrity. So she speaks. She risks her position, her relationships, her sense of belonging, because her inner law, the divine whisper within, will not allow her to betray what she knows is right. That is not mere ethics. That is sacred defiance. That is what it looks like when someone acts from the place where the divine and the human meet. And it is not easy. It can feel isolating. There are no medals for choosing inner truth over external reward. There are, at times, real consequences. You may lose friends, status, comfort. But what you gain is infinitely more valuable. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to walk through the world without the constant need for approval, because your approval comes from a higher source. The world is full of shifting values. What is considered right today may be condemned tomorrow. Entire civilizations have committed atrocities under the banner of cultural norms. Slavery was once legal. Women were once denied the right to speak, to learn, to vote. Entire groups of people have been labeled less than human by the standards of their time. If morality was simply about following the rules, history would be nothing but obedience to madness. But in every age there were those who disobeyed, who refused, who, often in secret, listened to the still voice within and lived by it, regardless of the cost. This kind of morality requires solitude, not loneliness, but the courage to step away from the crowd and reflect. To ask yourself again and again, am I aligned with what is real in me? It demands the discipline of silence, not because there is nothing to say, but because truth often reveals itself only when the noise of the world fades. In those quiet moments you meet the part of yourself that cannot be bought, seduced, or shamed. That part is where the divine lives. And from that place, action becomes clear. Not necessarily easy, but clear. There is a certain grace that comes when you act in alignment with your soul. Even in the face of adversity, you feel grounded. You are no longer torn in 1,000 directions, trying to please everyone, trying to adapt to the ever-changing expectations of others. You become still, centered. A mountain, not a leaf in the wind. It is from here that true change is born, not from mass movements or public outrage alone, but from individual souls who choose integrity over convenience, truth over popularity, conscience over comfort. One person who stands in their inner truth becomes a signal to others, a light, and others begin to remember their own capacity for inner knowing. This is how the world is transformed, not by force. When you act as if God is within you, your life ceases to be performative. It becomes authentic. You stop managing your image and start embodying your truth. And the morality that flows from that place is not brittle, it is alive, dynamic, and rooted in something eternal. You may not always be understood, but you will be whole, and that, in the end, is what it means to live with meaning. To act as if the divine is within you is to recognize that you are not merely a product of your circumstances, but a participant in something timeless. A living current of creation that flows through your hands, your words, your will. This is not a poetic idea, it is a lived reality, though most spend their lives unaware of it. They wait for signs, for validation, for someone to give them permission to speak, to build, to express. But creation does not ask for credentials. It does not wait for conditions to be perfect. It demands only that you say yes to it. That you become a vessel, willing to bear the risk of making something where there was nothing. There is something deeply sacred about this impulse to create. Whether it takes the form of painting a canvas, raising a child, planting a garden, inventing a solution, or healing a wound, it is the same energy. It is the quiet, unstoppable voice that says, "Bring something into being." This is not about being an artist in the narrow sense. The impulse to create lives in everyone. A mother who teaches her child to speak with kindness, a teacher who inspires curiosity, a builder who refuses to cut corners even when no one is watching. All are partaking in the act of creation. But to step into this power, you must cross an invisible threshold. You must stop waiting to feel worthy. The world may not applaud you. You may be told your voice is too small, your vision unrealistic, your dream foolish, but those judgments belong to people who have forgotten their own divine inheritance. The true creator listens not to noise but to necessity, to the quiet insistence of the soul that says, "You must do this," even if you are afraid, even if you fail, even if no one understands. There is a myth that in the beginning, even God had to face chaos, that before there was light, there was void, darkness, confusion, and from that formlessness, light was spoken into being. So why do we think that our creative journey will be neat, clear, or instantly rewarded. To create is to enter the unknown. It is to wrestle with uncertainty. It is to act without guarantee, to labor in faith and to birth something that did not exist before. Sometimes with trembling hands, but always with unwavering devotion. Think of the man born into poverty, who saw the children in his village growing up without education, without hope, without options. He had no money, no government support, no prestigious degree. He had nothing by the world's measure except a burning inner command that told him, "Build a school." And so he did, piece by piece, under trees, in borrowed spaces, with books donated or found. People doubted him. They mocked him. But he kept going, not because he was certain, but because he was called. Today, generations have passed through that school. Lives have changed. Futures have opened. Not because he had power in the traditional sense, but because he acted from that place where the sacred lives. This is what it means to step into creative power. It is not to chase fame or perfection. It is not to wait until you feel prepared or qualified. It is to know in the marrow of your being that what you bring into the world matters, not because it is flawless, but because it is true, because it is born from the divine within you. Too many are paralyzed by the idea that they are not enough, that they must first be enlightened, wealthy, certified, healed, or fearless before they can begin. But the truth is, creation rarely comes through those who feel entirely ready. It comes through those who respond to the inner voice, however faint, and choose to begin anyway. They create not to prove their worth, but because not creating would be a betrayal of their spirit. And when you create from this place, when you write the story, speak the truth, build the vision, or nurture the child, not from ego but from reverence, you become a mirror of the divine. You become a bringer of light into a world that still trembles in shadow. Your work may not be perfect. It may never be understood in your lifetime. But if it is honest, if it is made with integrity, it will outlive you. It will plant seeds in hearts you may never meet. That is the mystery of creation. You are not its owner, only its steward. And when you remember that the source of that creativity lives within you, you stop asking for permission. You begin. You shape. You give. You become, not a performer, but a creator, not a follower of rules, but a participant in the sacred. That is your true inheritance. Not fear, not hesitation, but the unshakable power to bring something into the world that only you can give. To act as if God is within you is not merely to embrace the light, it is to make peace with the dark. The divine within is not some sanitized, unshaken presence that exists only in joy, purity, or success. No, it is also found in dissent, in sorrow, in the moments when all meaning seems to collapse. And yet it is precisely there, in the pit, in the grief, in the unbearable weight of life, that the sacred often reveals itself most clearly. To act as if God is within is to walk toward these shadows with open eyes and a willing heart, not to be swallowed by them, but to be changed by them. For transformation is never born in the safety of comfort. It is born where something must be faced and endured. There is a myth in every culture about descent. The hero or the soul journeys into the underworld, the belly of the beast, the desert, the cave, always alone, always uncertain, often afraid. But the descent is never for its own sake. It is to recover something lost, to reclaim a part of the self that has been buried or denied. In our own lives, this descent may take the form of heartbreak, betrayal, addiction, grief, failure, or the slow erosion of joy that comes from living a life that is no longer true. And when these moments come, the impulse is often to run, to distract, to numb, to pretend we are not suffering. But something within us, something deeper, insists that the only way out is through. Consider the woman who lost her child. In a single moment the world shattered. What once gave her life rhythm and color now became unbearable silence. She did what most do. She retreated, she shut down, she wrapped herself in isolation because no words could reach her and no routine could comfort her. Time passed. The pain did not vanish, but neither did her soul. And one day she walked into a small room where other grieving mothers gathered, not because she was healed, but because she couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. There, in that room of shared silence and brokenness, something stirred. Not joy, not yet, but truth. In their stories she saw her own. In their tears she found a place for hers. She did not fix anyone, she did not save anyone, but she listened, and in that act of presence she began to return to herself. This is the mystery of descent. When we stop running from what haunts us, we turn the haunted places into sanctuaries. Pain does not disappear, but it transforms, it deepens us, it humbles us, it opens doors we never knew were there. Doors to compassion, to resilience, to a love that includes sorrow instead of denying it. We live in a world obsessed with brightness, highlight reels, filtered happiness, curated strength. But this veneer of perfection is paper thin. Underneath, so many walk quietly with burdens they have never named aloud. The invitation is not to pretend those burdens don't exist, but to hold them with dignity, to carry them like lanterns, not wounds to be hidden, but wounds to be honored, not as definitions of who we are, but as teachers, to suffer and not become bitter, to feel pain and not transmit it as violence, to lose and still choose love. That is the true strength of the soul. When we face the dark with the belief that something sacred still resides within us, even there we change the terms of the experience. We are no longer victims of what happened. We become bearers of wisdom forged in the fire. Our scars do not disfigure us. They become marks of initiation. And others, seeing us, feel less alone. That is the quiet miracle of authenticity. When we show up, broken but present, wounded but honest, others feel safe enough to show up too, and in that mutual presence, healing begins. It is not that those who carry light have never been in darkness. It is that they have been there and chosen to bring something back. They have faced what was unbearable, and instead of letting it destroy them, they allowed it to deepen them. This is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of something greater than fear. It is the divine courage to sit in the ash and wait for the ember to speak. So no, the divine is not only found in triumph, it is found in the moment when a person, shattered by life, refuses to close their heart, when they open their hands and offer their pain not as a weapon, but as a gift, when they choose, in all their fragility, to love again. That is not weakness. That is divinity revealed through the human form, and it is more powerful than any illusion of perfection. When you live as if God is within you, something ancient awakens. You begin to move through life differently, not with the frantic desire to prove yourself, to be seen, to be validated, but with a quiet, unwavering sense that love is no longer something you seek, it is something you are. There is no longer a need to perform in order to be worthy. You no longer barter affection or chase the approval of those who do not see. Instead, love begins to radiate outward from you. Not as a performance, but as a natural emanation of your being, like light from a flame, like fruit from a tree that knows it does not need to earn its place in the orchard. This love is not the soft, diluted imitation so often sold in stories or slogans. It is not romanticized fantasy, nor the type that wavers with mood or convenience. No, the love that emerges from within a soul, aligned with the divine, is something far more powerful, something that sees clearly and still chooses to embrace. It does not ignore wounds, it tends to them. It does not flee from conflict, it meets it with presence and conviction. This love has spine. It does not merely comfort, it also disrupts, dismantles, defends. It confronts injustice without becoming hatred. It names truth without becoming cruelty. It is a love that walks into difficult places, not to rescue or control, but to stand beside, to endure, to witness, and to carry what cannot be carried alone. This kind of love cannot be faked. It flows only when the heart is unclenched, when fear is not the ruling force, when the soul remembers that it was made not only to survive, but to serve. When you stop seeing people as problems to manage or enemies to defeat, and begin to see them as mirrors of your own wounded longing to be known, loved, and understood, then compassion arises, and from that compassion flows a kind of love that is not about being good, but about being whole. The transformation is subtle at first. You find yourself listening more deeply, not to respond, but to understand. You stop interrupting, you stop pretending. Your presence becomes a refuge. Others feel safer near you, not because you fix their pain, but because you don't run from it. You look them in the eye, not with pity, but with recognition. You've been there too. You remember what it's like to ache, to doubt, to feel invisible. That memory does not harden you. It opens you. And so you offer the thing we all long for and so rarely receive. Presence without judgment. Space without shame. Attention without agenda. And the most miraculous part is this: the more you love others from this place, the more whole you become. Neuroscience supports what the soul already knows. Studies have shown that those who engage in regular acts of compassion, generosity, and empathy, those who give from a genuine place, experience increased activity in areas of the brain associated with joy and fulfillment. It is as if the very fabric of our being was designed to reward us when we align with love, not transactional love, not performative care, but real, raw, unfiltered love that flows because it must, because it cannot do otherwise. To radiate this kind of love is not a technique, it is a transformation. It is what happens when you stop trying to get love from the world and instead become the one who gives it. And in that giving you are not depleted, you are renewed, you are not made smaller by your offering, you are expanded. Because love, real love, is not a limited resource. It is a well that deepens the more you draw from it. You discover that your heart is not a fragile thing that must be guarded at all costs. It is a vessel that grows stronger the more it is poured out. When you act as if God is within, you cannot help but love, not because people are always lovable, but because you no longer wait for permission. You love the difficult, the damaged, the distant, not to fix them, but to remind them that they are still worthy of being seen. You become the one who breaks cycles, not with anger, but with presence. You become the one who says, "It ends with me." The hatred, the silence, the neglect. It ends here, not because you have all the answers, but because you have remembered who you are. And in that remembering, something eternal stirs. You begin to live not as someone afraid to be hurt, but as someone who knows they are held by something greater than hurt. You no longer shrink in fear of rejection. You no longer hide your tenderness. You let your heart be seen, not as weakness, but as sacred strength. You become not a seeker of light, but a source of it. Not because you are special, but because you are awake, because the divine within you has found its voice. Not in thunder, but in love that refuses to end. So I ask you now, not to believe in dogma, not to accept any imposed creed, but to listen deeply to the whisper within you that has always known who you truly are. Live as if God is within you. Speak as if your words shape worlds. Act as if love is your law. Create as if eternity is your canvas. And walk forward, not as a seeker of light, but as its bearer. Thank you.